people were living there.
Yeah, but you've also got people from what's called Anglo-Saxon, but of Icenic background, writing the Iceni language on this continent. Because there are 3 inscriptions very clearly in Icenic on this continent again, and of antiquity. So you probably had a few Irish people and came along for the ride as well. I would think so. Be surprised if they didn't.
And snake worshippers.
Well, so really, Schoolcraft was in a no-win situation, because he was entering a country which was on a nationalistic high, and this was the not in the same vicious way, but in a different way, but a political Third Reich situation in 1850 in the UK. And they were beating the drum, their wonderful achievements. They suddenly had railway engines that would run anywhere, and move anything, huge loads and people. They now didn't rely on the wind. They had steamships and sailed the oceans. They were making ships out of iron, whereas for 3,000 years they'd been made out of wood. They thought ruling most of the world, India and lumps of Africa and God knows where. And so they were on a sort of mental high. And therefore it was inconceivable that their ancestry should not be superior to that of others. And this was the mental situation, the froth into which Schoolcraft would have entered. And they'd have sent him in ever decreasing circles.
Well, he certainly did. It got him confused well, in spite of the fact that on that stone there's a big British cross on the bottom. He ignored that. And yet it shouted out to him that these people were in fact Christians.
So what do you do? We're not up against a situation of, what do we say? If this were put into a court of law with a prosecution and a defense, right? Before the jury, we'd win easily. There's no question at all about that. The facts and the evidence come down irrevocably in favour of this alphabet, its integrity, its authenticity and its accuracy, and also in favour of the accuracy of the histories we're discussing. But the trouble is to get it into open discussion, into the open public forum. Because, you see, apart from anything else, people in universities have only one thing generally, and that's their reputation. And the reputation is the most fragile entity on the face of planet Earth. And if they have nailed their flags too firmly to the wrong mast, they perceive they're in definitely desperate trouble. And so we are up against a situation where I think the main problem we face is actually getting the evidence into the open and getting the evidence displayed, explained, and publicly examined and discussed.
I think it should be.
And but that's your problem.
That's the problem.
Because a man who knows that he's going to lose will go to court and say to the judge, Your Honour, please do not allow this evidence into court. It is inadmissible evidence. Now, in court in America today, I've seen some films, and they say, you can't allow this evidence into court. They didn't have a search warrant when they found this, so this murderer is not a murderer. You see? Because the guy who found the gun didn't have a warrant to find the gun. Now, what they're saying is exactly the same thing. They're saying, aha, that evidence was not found by a university archaeologist. Therefore, it is inadmissible. But if you think, how many archaeologists are there in universities? Very, very few. So the majority of them do not spend their time tramping the hills and woods. They're mainly in big cities and sitting down lecturing and telling students a pack of nonsense, right? And therefore, the chances of archaeologists finding something is actually remote. Most things that are found in Britain are found by workmen digging a trench. They're digging a sewer. They find the palace of King Cogidubnus, which has been lost for 1800 years. And they find a Roman villa when somebody wanted to build a barn in Gwent. And when he wanted to build his barn, they found a Roman villa. Then they found a whole Roman town along the river. Then they found a whole Roman cemetery with stone sarcophaguses because somebody wanted to build a barn. So archaeologists don't actually go out and find things.
But that isn't necessarily the case, because those government employees at Loudoun County were working and took the material straight to the Smithsonian. That is on record. They were pre-archaeologists, but they were trained to do what they did.
But the stance is, Your Honour, this evidence is inadmissible because it proves us wrong and loses our case. That's the nub of it.
Isn't that the truth?
And yet, therefore, you could say in this case, nearly everything in the world is inadmissible. Arab youths found the Dead Sea Scrolls, not an archaeologist. An Arab goat herd found the cache of the pharaohs in Egypt, at Del al-Abir. And he found 36 pharaohs in a cave. An archaeologist didn't find them.
Of course not.
And then they found another cache of over 140 minor royal bodies. Again, Arabs found it. And you'll find almost anything and everything that has actually been found, very little of it has been as a result of scientific examination of the histories in order to see if the histories are correct. It's almost always a chance find. The boats found at Chepstow in Wales 2 years ago on the river. Somebody is digging on the riverbank where there was an ancient port recorded. The archaeologists and historians have ignored it totally. Nobody's ever gone along and said, let's have a trial, see if it's a boat here. Somebody, nothing to do with the colleges, finds timber. He recognises it may be old. He reports it. Result, 26-foot boat, 1,500 years old. Not towed by the archaeologists. Because the chances of them doing it, if you think of it, unless they study the history and say, by analysis, this site should yield something.
Yes.
But their chances, everything is accidental.
They don't use the historical records.
They don't.
But you also have a different mindset over there, because within 2 hours there was an archaeologist on hand. Within 24 hours you had 50,000 pounds, $80,000. And in 6 months?
6 weeks.
6 weeks?
$500,000.
$500,000.
And they got both of
And
them.
they got
But the point is, what they're trying to say, as I perceive it here, is if it is not actually found by an archaeologist, in other words, a man goes out hunting, stumbles on something in the woods, a sculpted head, right?
Right.
That is now contaminated evidence, because he's not an archaeologist. Another guy goes somewhere, finds something in a cave. Pity he did that. It's now contaminated. It's not archaeological evidence. You know, this is an imbecile attitude. The idea is that 250 million Americans are a bunch of liars, and only about 1,000 people are to be trusted. And they're the archaeologists. And most of them are interested in Egypt and Greece and elsewhere. And it brings you down to about 20 people at the end of the day in colleges who are saying only we are to be trusted to find anything, and we're not going to bother. And if you find something, we're going to ignore it because it's contaminated because you found it, not me. Can't be true because I didn't think of it.
And they certainly are ignoring our historians that say it must be true because it's here in the history.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is give us back our history. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, there is something seriously wrong. It's unbelievably wrong. And I think Schoolcraft would have been misled in England, definitely. And nobody in England would bother to go 150 miles to the Welsh border to find out. And if he did, he would energetically conceal that which he discovered.
But there was a university in 1840, certainly set up in Wales. It was probably bigger than Oxford.
No, there were the beginnings of a university in Aberystwyth. It has now grown. I think the University of Wales has 18,000 students. It's 12,000 in Cardiff. So the University of Wales has grown, but the Welsh universities in antiquity did exist in the Dark Ages.
Oh, yeah.
And 3 Welsh scholars were taken to found Oxford University for Alfred the Great, I think in the year 900. So he had to get them from Wales too, because nobody in England could read and write at the time. And that's recorded by Alfred. So you begin there. But certainly we had universities until about, say, 1100, and they were destroyed by the persistent attacks. The first attack of the English